Welcome to the Futurist Society podcast, where we delve into the latest advancements in technology, science, and culture. From discussions on the latest breakthroughs in AI, biotechnology, and space exploration, the Futurist Society is your window into all of the awesomeness that the future holds. Get ready to be informed and inspired as we consider the positive impact of emerging technologies on humanity. Without further ado, welcome your host, Dr. Awesome.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Futurist Society, where, as always, I am your host, Dr. Awesome. As always, we will be talking in the present, but talking about the future with my very special guest, Dr. Anand Rao, distinguished professor at Carnegie Mellon University at the Center for Applied Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. And as always, I will be asking him what he thinks the future holds. So thank you so much for joining us, Anand. And I want to ask you specifically what it is that you're doing at Carnegie Mellon and what you think the AI is going to have in regards to the future.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm a distinguished professor of applied data science and artificial intelligence at Carnegie Mellon. I joined there 10 months back, and I'm teaching a few courses all focused around operationalizing AI, responsible AI, and also the applications of generative AI or large language models, and also looking a little bit into the near future, I would say, in terms of agent-based modeling, agent architectures, and how the notion of AI is going to proceed further in all the great ways in which we have seen, looking at manual labor, cognitive, creative, and a number of different facets. I also teach the executive education. I have had a 25, 30-year history of being in the commercial sector as part of the global AI leader for PwC, and before that in the company that they acquired. So I have a lot of industry expertise, and one of the reasons I joined CMU was to bring that industry expertise to teach the students and the executive education, and also to be more closely involved with the public policy and where we set the policies for the country and for the globe as well.
So I just wanted to double click on the commercial aspect, because you said you were applying artificial intelligence at PricewaterhouseCoopers. So for those people who are not familiar, it's a big accounting firm. It's called one of like the big four. And if you're doing taxes as a business, you're probably using one of these big four companies. And when I think of artificial intelligence, and what I'm sure most of our listeners think about artificial intelligence, they think about large language models, the ability to communicate with this thing that has a more human interface than what we use in Google or what we use on Yahoo or Bing or any of these search engines. But certainly it's much more than that. And I just want to know specifically, how is it being used in the financial space?
Yeah, no, great question. So as you just said, artificial intelligence is much more than what we are used to today, even before the current adoption, I would say, of all these voice interfaces, whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini or any one of those, a number of models that are out there. AI has been around and has been used by people, right? So I know most people use photos on their cell phones, and over the past, I would say, 5 years, the cameras or the phones can recognize your face, can recognize people in your family, right? So if you start tagging a particular image with a name, then it starts going and grabbing those and naming those. And not only that, it can actually go back even 5 years back, old photograph where you may not look exactly like what you look now, but slightly different. It can younger, right? So it would still capture that. So all of that is actually artificial intelligence as well. Even if we go earlier, a little bit earlier, we had all different kinds of search techniques, and search techniques were also using artificial intelligence in the background. And then even before that, expert systems, knowledge-based systems, and a number of other areas like recognizing the check writing and the handwriting in the check. So that's been commercial since around 90s, and that also has the AI technology behind it. So AI is sort of very pervasive, but it has not really touched directly the users, I would say, other than through applications. So here we are seeing it much more directly connected. Now, to answer your question around financial services, it's essentially being used in financial services across the spectrum, right? So let me try and start from the consumer side, right? So the customer side. So you look for, hey, I want advice around how much to save for retirement or how much to save for kids' education. That again, you can have a financial advisor do it, but now the financial advisors themselves can use the AI, or the consumers can directly start using the AI to try and understand, hey, what are the different options here? And again, we talk about the future, what it would look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So we can say, hey, no one can predict that. The stock market can go up and down, but there is a very rich history of the stock market, at least for the 100 years we have the data. So we can start putting forward scenarios. What if there was, in the next 10 years, a recession? How will your pot of money fare as you look at the 10-year? What if there is a continuous period of growth? How will it grow? Right. So all of those scenarios is something that we consumers can explore, not just broad market economic scenarios. You can also look at your very specific scenarios. I have 2 kids and I want to put them to private college. What it would look like in 20 years' time when they go to college, right? So the inflation and what it would look like, right? So, and how much do I need to save? All of those things are things that consumers can use with the AI essentially powering it. But then you go inside the organization, whether the organization is trying to develop the financial products or trying to market it, try to find out who is the right kind of a customer. Again, AI comes in there. AI comes into the operations of companies. As you buy, sell stocks, everything behind it is being managed by the AI. So connecting to the various systems. And currently it's the software, even those softwares are being now written, or at least initial versions are being written by the AI. Earlier, we used to have programmers doing it. We still have programmers, but now the programmers are using these kinds of tools to make it easier and faster for them to do the development. And then, of course, you go into the back end, which most people ignore. We call it boring problems, but cool solutions for boring problems. So you can still use AI for many of the administration of the accounting, opening of accounts, closing of accounts, right? So managing the customer relationships, all of those things, AI comes in. So pretty much it's pervasive everywhere in the financial services industry.
I can tell that there's a difference between, my banking experience now, like even having a chatbot that greets me as soon as I enter into the Bank of America website. Like I've seen that change, just like what you're talking about, which is the small little advancements in society, like Apple sending me a video of all of the pictures of my daughter, even when she was a baby to now, right? Just to get some sentimental value from me using the phone. It creates this stuff, and I just want to use the phone more, right? And what I look at that is it's pattern recognition, right? And just trying to wrap my head around it as someone who's not in the industry, I know what pattern recognition is, and all of its different facets that helps our lives. And doing a deeper dive into it, the pure raw information that the computer is processing is these CSV files, right? Like these comma separated value files, and it's just raw information separated by comma. And so the idea of the software looking through all this data, it recognizes a pattern and creates some sort of either solution or calculation or something from that data, right?
Yeah.
To me, I feel like that is really the lowest level of intelligence, right? Calculation is maybe one step lower. Like a calculator you can do 9 times 9. And when I look at someone who maybe has a developmental disability, like autism or really high functioning, even less high functioning autism, they can do calculations very fast, right? the next step up is pattern recognition. So like that person who has, some sort of developmental disability can still recognize, okay, it's morning time to brush our teeth.
Mm-hmm.
They associate that time with brushing their teeth. What is the next step up from that?
Yeah.
Is it judgment? Is it probability? Like where's the next layer of artificial intelligence going to go?
Yeah, a great description there in terms of the different levels. I would just add one more layer to it, right? So the way, at least I think about AI, again, in very simple terms, is just sort of equated to a human. We pretty much do three things at the very, very top level, as you said, right? So it's sensing, thinking, and acting, right? So sensing, obviously, we have our sense organs. We see, we hear, we smell, we feel the touch, right? So we speak all of those senses. Now, computer science or AI has been very much, no, you need to give it to me in a very specific format. You need to type in, maybe in a programming language, or maybe the data in some kind of a format, defined format, then I'll be able to understand. So we are going from that type of give me the code the way I want it to. Hey, no, I'll talk to you. I'll just send you a camera feed of our conversation. Go figure out the facial movement, the body movement of the two of us. Transcribe what we are saying, right? So even though my accent may not be a purely American accent, go translate it or transcribe it. So all of those things is now performing, right? So that's some of the advancements. So the sensing part, it is increasingly being able to come to where we are as opposed to we going to the way it wants, right? So the AI wants. So that's on the sensing side. And I think what you mentioned was very much around the thinking aspects, right? So in the thinking aspects, as we all know, we are very good at certain types of computation, right? So addition, multiplication, sort of basic set of math. We as people are also good at certain type of logical thinking, right? So A implies B, B implies C, therefore A implies C, right? So as you just said, yeah, it's sunny outside, so I don't need an umbrella. Or if it is sort of cloudy, then I might say, hey, if I go out and if it rains, then I'll get wet. And I don't want to get wet, therefore I should take an umbrella, right? So that type of very simple reasoning, of course, it can get very complex. Then, as you said, pattern recognition. So looking at the sky and say, it's not going to rain, or it's going to rain, and I better take my umbrella. So that's sort of recognizing at a somewhat deeper level where we have our gut feel or our experience over time, looking at the clouds, the darkness, we can do. So that's sort of the perception that you were talking. But then there's also learning. One of the things that AI obviously has seen quite a few advances over the past couple of days is learning. And the way we learn is from previous data, but we also learn from experimenting with the world, right? So we do certain things, we see what happens, and then based on that, we change our behavior, what some people call as reinforcement learning, or we can learn just by having a number of those issues. Now, where we are going is in the relative past, right? So 5-10 years back, most of the technology was I needed a good historical data, and then I would essentially project forward based on my historical information. So in other words, based on the past, I'm projecting the future. And yes, that is also an important technique and an important skill to have. So the AI was doing more of that, what are called as predictive models. So you wanted to make sure that your prediction holds sway even when based on the history, right? So now where we are going is not just predicting, but imagining different scenarios, being able to do what if analysis, being able to say, today it's like this, but when I take an action, something else will happen, and I need to take that into account. Again, there are various type of causality that we are bringing in. So we can say, hey, this is caused by this. Let's look at the root causes and keep going down to really identify how this chain of reasoning works, and then essentially to develop those causal loops. Now, further on with all the chat GPT and all the bots that we are hearing is this capability of generating something new. Everyone is excited about generation of text to speech, images, because that is something that we have always viewed as, hey, that's sort of more human to create something. The AI can always come back and based on the history can do something, but generating is something more creative than normal. So now that excitement is a little bit around that creative part. Of course, the AI is all of these, so it can essentially combine all of these different elements. So that's where we are seeing the thinking actually evolve from very simple rule-based to prediction based on history, to scenario modeling and what if analysis based around causality. So the thinking itself is sort of expanding into very more complex systems, as they call it. And then the last one I don't want to miss out is action, right? So the action part, we have always been somewhat more hesitant to let the AI go and act on its own. We have always been, hey, no, you tell me and I'll go and do the transaction, right? So again, in terms of the advice, for example, hey, you tell me what stocks to buy or sell, and then I'll go and then push the trade button here, right? So buy or sell. I don't want you to do it. But of course, now there is automated trading where now we are feeling more and more comfortable, confident in having some of those transactions go through, not just in trading, but also let the AI send the email, let the AI take those actions. So we are also devolving some of the actions to the AI, and autonomous vehicles being a great example. Even though we don't have full-fledged autonomy, we know we all have experienced it in our cars. So we can just leave the steering wheel, take off, and then it just follows the road, right? So we are able to at least trust enough to give that level of control back to the machine in terms of directly acting, whether we being the mediators.
Honestly, I don't think that everybody trusts their vehicle the same way that you might. And I think that the action part, just like what you said, there is this tendency for much of the population to think, I want to be in between the action and then the reasoning, right? When I think about that, I think of that as like that's judgment, right? The human has to judge whether this action is beneficial or not beneficial, whether it's autonomous vehicles, whether it's trading, whatever it is. Some of those things that you're talking about, it outsources that judgment to the AI, just like fully self-driving. You're really just letting the AI take the wheel. So the judgment is completely on the car, and I think that scares a lot of people, right? I don't have a Tesla, but I rented one when I went on vacation, and we tried the full self-driving, and it was unsettling to my wife. What would you say to those people? Right? Because personally, I don't have a problem with it. And for me, it was a really nice experience to let go of the thing. And I think that would be more beneficial for society if we could be more comfortable with AI making those judgments. But then also, I would say, other than like what you would say to that person, like when is our chat GPT moment going to be for the judgment portion? Like when are we going to say, okay, actually, it is safer to drive with everybody on full self-driving? Like, when is that cultural change going to happen?
I think the types of tasks that it is handling, again, varies by the level of interaction, if you like, between the human and the machine, right? So we actually have 4 types of AI, if you like. The first one, I call it as automated intelligence. The second, again, it's a quadrant. So on one side of the quadrant, it is automated intelligence. On the next side, it is essentially assisted intelligence. Then below that, it is augmented intelligence. And then it is autonomous intelligence, right? So let me try and explain all 4. Now, when the task is very simple, very repetitive, one-off, where it is so mundane that it is more of a chore for the human to keep doing it, right? So I'll give you an example, right? So even a few years back, people used to take your insurance application or your DMV application where you need to fill in the name and your social security, all of those numbers, and then someone will be there keying it in whatever other system. So now that's a mundane kind of a job. Of course, we do employ people, pay them, but it's a boring task. Now, most of those things are being automated or copying from one system to the other because there is a way of verifying, quote unquote, the ground truth, right? So someone can look at the application form, someone can look at what the system they have entered in the system and say, yes, that is correct, right? So I'm happy. Now, the more and more that happens, there is no human actually checking it because you have actually got the system automatically doing it, right? So that's automated intelligence. And you do that only for very specific tasks and very simple specific tasks. And that also happened over time, right? So it didn't immediately happen, the first system. We didn't go and install it over a period of time. We have perfected that. There are some of those things that go into automated intelligence. So it is a level of human involvement is pretty close to zero. The AI is sort of basically doing most of it. And for very simple tasks, it is automated, right? So distinguish between automated and autonomous automated tasks. Now, most of the way in which we have used AI till around a few years back, right, so at least a decade back, has been what I would call as assisted intelligence. In other words, there is a lot of data there. Again, in a medical profession, for example, there's a great body of knowledge, there's a great body of data around the individual, around the drugs, and so on. And essentially the system is analyzing it, and as you said, it gives it to the physician or it gives it to the radiographer, so who then looks at it and then says yes, and they are using their judgment and then taking whatever actions that they need to take, whether it's the medical or the financial domain. So this is assisted intelligence, or you're being assisted. And if you like, the AI is more like a slave for you, right? So it is doing the task, but you are in complete control of what it is doing. So that is the assisted intelligence. Now, to answer your question, now we are moving more into that augmented intelligence. What we mean by augmented intelligence is that the AI is learning from us. It's not just static, consuming all of the data and then spitting out something, but now it is also trying to make the judgment. It is trying to infer how you're making the judgment. So it can actually recommend things to you and you still take the actions. Now it is actually calculating, hey, how many times did the human accept my recommendation? And how many times did the human override my recommendation? Why did the human override my recommendation? Am I doing something wrong? Can I change it? Right? So it is actively learning from the human, right? So in that sense, we are moving from having an AI as a slave to potentially having AI as a co-worker, right? So it is actually, hey, I can consult with this. I can brainstorm. I'm not sure what exactly to do here. Now, give me 3 alternatives for how I should think about this particular problem. It comes up and say, that triggers a few thoughts for yourself, right? So we're all thinking and thinking, so in that sense, it is helping us. And in fact, we are helping it as well, right? So based on whatever decisions it's making, it is learning from us and it's getting better. And we are learning from it and we are getting better as well, right? So that's the augmented intelligence phase that we have. That's a much closer collaboration of the human and the AI, right? So both working together. Now we go into autonomous agents, and that's where some of the totally autonomous cars would fit in that bucket, where we are saying, hey, we are so comfortable between our interaction with the AI that even for some of these tasks, which are probably much more involved, we are willing to trust the AI to do it, right? So, and that willingness to trust happens at multiple levels. It happens at an individual level. It also happens at a technology level, right? So something which is very new, very few people will really trust it, including the researchers, I would say, right? So we really want to say, test it. We want to validate the model. Hey, before we deploy it, we need to do all of these things, right? So there's a whole host of things that we want to make sure that the AI can do or the machine can do. But over time, we build that confidence. Again, that may not happen at the same time for everyone. But as you just said, I have a very similar experience with my Tesla. And My wife is sort of very scared. She said, no, don't do the auto parking. And the auto parking, it sort of does it very quickly, right? So it just sort of swivels the wheel back, right, left, and in a very small space, it squeezes in. Much better than what I would do in parallel parking, but it's still a bit scary, right? So what
Yeah.
happens if it hits? It goes so close to the other vehicle,
Right.
but still does it. So again, first time I was scared too, right? So, but I decided to try a couple of times and then worked. So I still use it, but she still finds it very scary. Now that is a process that needs to happen. And as more people see other people doing it, they get more confident. I talk to you and you have been doing it. Oh, it's no big deal. I do it all the time. Then you find a little bit more courage to try it once. And of course, the critical thing here is the AI should not fail. At any one point, if it fails, if it sort of goes too close or hits the other vehicle, then I'm not going to be using it, right? So there's a whole host of things around that trust that we have between us and the machine that needs to be managed. And then based on that, we might go to autonomous. And my own view is that that should be left to society, to individuals and to society. There are things that AI can do. Maybe there are things that the AI can potentially do in the future, but just because we do it doesn't mean that it has to be done by everyone and it has to be put into products and where there is no choice, right? So because people are very different and they should not be forced to give up that judgment. Some people might still continue on with that judgment, doing themselves rather than the machine. So just because we can do it technologically doesn't mean that we should make it done or accept it socially, right? So social acceptance is very different to technology capability, right? So try to distinguish the two.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that social acceptance is different. But I think back to like when ChatGPT first came out, right? A friend of mine texted it to me and it just blew my mind, right? The idea that I could say, hey, write an email to my staff to say that you need to clean out the fridge every week, and it writes this beautiful email that would have taken me like 10 minutes and it took me 10 seconds, right?
Yep.
And I was like, oh my God, I can think of so many test cases for this,
Yes.
right? And immediately, because it was low stakes, it was, it wasn't really that big of a deal. I think that it spread throughout the entire world very fast. Like within the span of 3 months, everybody knew what ChatGPT was. Before that, they had no idea. And I think that that was a really significant moment. And like I look back at other technological revolutions, like when the iPod came out, right? So Steve Jobs unveils the iPod. Everybody thinks it's amazing, and very fast, everybody's on digital audio rather than traditional CDs, rather than, and what do you think that moment is going to look like for artificial intelligence when it comes to trust? Like, when do you think that, or like, how is it going to come about? Do you think it's going to come from robots in the household? Do you think it's going to come from full self-driving? Based on your experience, where do you think it's going to come from?
I would say that that'll probably come more in areas where there is no physical action, right? So which is much more cognitive, creative, just as you said, the ChatGPT side of things, and being able to see something new, right? So image, right? So and I think some of those moments are also happening at a and this is what happens with the human mind, right? So the first time you see something, there's a wow element. But then there is sort of significant improvements that happen along the way. It looks similar, and that same wow moment is not there, right? So I'll give you an example, right? So when the chat was there, people said, "Oh, this is great," but hey, you can't really do images was also there, but they said, "Oh, you can't do any videos and animation." Now it's possible, right? So there's so realistic videos that are being shot by the by the AI, right? So you just have to describe a scene and it just does that, right? So, or you describe in text something and it actually is creating a game, and that's sort of mind blowing, right? So there are these kinds of moments where it is sort of advancing, right? So programming, for example, again, it's not at the same level that it can fully put together a complete system yet. But if you look at websites that are being automated, right? So again, PowerPoint slides, still very early days, but to be able to converse with something and say, hey, put together a presentation for me. I want it in this format, right? So I want you to cover these areas. So show me instead of write me now, right? So show me three alternative diagrams on how I can illustrate this, right? So that's not too far away, right? So, and being able to articulate your thoughts through a conversation and interactively. I don't think the AI will know perfectly what we want, and we may not even be able to articulate perfectly what we want. And as we have all seen, even interacting with other humans, again, as a consultant, as you know, we write a lot of presentations, right? So when a partner goes and says, I want this presentation, they can articulate what is the gist of it, but unless you really start seeing the material, you say, oh, no, you can change this, you can combine this with this, and this visual will be great, right? So making it much more visual. And that's something that happens interactively. And I think the AI is getting there where it could be very interactive, present, do a whole movie, as it's, I think some people have started doing that with 60-second, 90 couple of minute clips. So I think that's where we are going. And those are the areas where I think that element of trust will come in. And also I've also looked at the negative side of it. What happens if something, it doesn't produce the way you want it? There's always somewhere some fallback where you can say, no, that's not right, so change it to this, right? So there is more of a collaboration there that we'll start trusting the machine as opposed to complete devolution of our judgment, right? So, and that will come only after we do these things. So to answer your question, it may not be so much in really action oriented, like autonomous vehicles, flying drones, and so on, but it might be more in these kinds of cognitive / creative tasks that we will start developing the trust, and that will transfer to some extent to the other areas as well. But there are other ways of testing some of the more physical things. Again, the harm that it can cause physically is more harmful than something which is psychological, although psychological is also very important. But
I think that the physical is going to come first. Personally, I think that the last vestige of humanity is social interaction, and interacting with other people, and there are really good chatbots out there that can help me at the bank, but I prefer to talk to somebody. That's just me. Or when I'm booking an airline, I'm sure that it's capable right now. I prefer to call the person on the phone, and even having a conversation like this, like realistically, I could be having a conversation with a chatbot that is based off all of the previous lectures that you've given at Carnegie Mellon. That's based on all of like your audio and video that sounds like you, that talks like you, that looks like you. And I prefer to talk to the actual human, and for whatever reason, I think that that's something that humanity is just like has deeply ingrained in them. But man, some of the common mundane tasks that people hate to do, like laundry or washing the dishes or something like that, if we can get like a consumer robot in the house with like low stakes tasks like watering flowers or doing things like that, I think that would be a game changer. That would change people's lives. And I think that that's really what people are hoping for from technology. When I'm in the market for a new car, now I'm thinking I want something with full self-driving, because then I can watch a movie on the way to work, or I have that time back to me. But I don't think it's quite there now. But I think that once we get something like that, then I think that that's something that will change all of us.
Yeah. So the other way to look at that, if you take something that the human is doing getting to 95% of our capability is, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it is relatively easier to get the AI or a robot to do. And it is that last 5% that takes a long time. It's a curve, like it goes like this and doesn't quite get the 100, right? So sort of asymptotes there for a long time. So I think even if it is physical things, as you just said, a physical robot or an autonomous vehicle that can do things, or a dishwasher, it is what is our tolerance for that 2-3%. If we are willing to get, sometimes it might get it wrong. That's fine. Then I think you can get to that 93-95%. So getting to that last few percentage points is going to be much harder for AI, robotics, and others. Again, as you said, there are things that are coming, but it's that last thing, and the physical harm, right? So, for example, dishwasher, it's not moving around, so it can unlikely to cause physical harm. But a robot, if it's moving around, you want to make sure that even if it is only 2% of the time, it might go bump against a cat or bump against a baby. You don't want that to happen, right? So that's where I think the hesitation is, and the trust again.
Would you trust a robot in your house?
I would trust a robot only for very mechanical things, right? So again, I got iRobot once, and
oh, you got a Roomba?
Yeah, a Roomba, but then it was again, it was not up to the mark, right? So again, it can do certain things well, certain things not so well, but obviously it's not very it's not dangerous or anything, right? So safety wise, it was good, but
like the Roomba, for example, like it cleans 98% of the floor.
Yep.
You know, like, and I think it's something nice that it turns on by itself when I'm not home.
That's right. Yeah.
It comes back in. You know, I think that's a great product, and I think that really was eye-opening to a lot of people of having that in the household. And I feel like that kind of service, when that's available for something that is a little bit more difficult, I think people will realize, okay, I mean, if it can wash the dishes, it can water my plants. If it can water my plants, it can do my laundry. If it can do my laundry, it can do this, you know?
Yeah, watering plants or feeding my cat, right? So those are things that, again, if you're going out, right? So you're planning to go on a vacation, one of the big problems, hey, who's going to water the plants? And that, as you say, it's fairly trivial, right? So even if you don't want to overwater, you can easily have a sensor that is just dip into the soil, see the wetness of the soil, and then just go get water and put it, right? So it's related, one would think, easy to do, but still we don't have at the scale of adoption.
So with your family members that maybe don't trust AI, that might feel a little bit hesitant, what do you say to them?
What I try and do is to maybe use it myself a couple of times, and then try and get them comfortable so that you remove that fear, right? So that's one. And then I think every individual is somewhat different too, right? So some naturally adopt to certain things, some people don't. And then I also think sometimes it is generational on when you adopt certain things. So give you an example, right? So I got my cell phone here, and still to search today, I still go in and type, right? So of course, my kids, they're not in AI, but they would say, Dad, you're supposed to be in AI. Why are you typing the thing, right? So can't you just sort of speak and it'll pick up?
I
know
type
it
too.
does.
I type too.
Right?
I'm guilty of that.
So it's not that I'm fearful. It's just that you get used to it, and it's a habit that you don't want to change, or you don't change. Even though you know everything it can do perfectly, right? So again, earlier at least it might do the mistake, but I've tried it a few times and it's always come out right. But then the natural inclination is not there. So that's where I think the adoption, we need to let the adoption happen, not really force, right? So we can encourage adoption by doing various things, so by removing the fear, educating the people, showing them how to do. But at the end of the day, again, we are humans, and rightly or wrongly, so we
Yeah.
are the apex of the pyramid.
I totally agree with the typing comment because I'm sure that if I were to, talk into my phone, it would get the voice to text better than I would type it,
Yeah.
more accurately than the way that I would type it. Because like I'm typing and like I might spell something, I have to delete it a couple letters, and then that whole process probably takes longer. But for whatever reason, even though I know it's more efficient, I haven't made the jump yet. Just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
yourself, it's just force of habit, right?
Hmm.
And I do agree with you. I think that that's not it, and I'm an early adopter. I love technology. It's not something that for whatever reason I've made the jump yet, even though I should. But I think that you're right that it's going to happen organically. It's going to happen on that person's individual timetable.
Hmm.
I just wanted to be not feared as much,
Yes. Yeah.
and I feel like everybody thinks of AI as this existential threat, and to a certain extent it is, right? But I feel like it's also similar to, have you seen the movie Oppenheimer?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's similar to the atomic bomb, right?
Yeah.
Like they were like considering the idea of the bomb, and they said that there's a really small percentage chance that it could ignite the entire atmosphere,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they still went ahead with it. I think that it's similar to that, right? I
Mhm.
think that the likelihood of existential threat is so low that we should be cognizant of it, because any sort of existential threat is something that we should take very seriously. But I would really like to have a robot that washes my dishes, like
Yes. Yeah.
I think that it's not going to happen unless society gets on board, unless investment goes in the right direction. Um, the last thing I wanted to talk with you is like so much of what we talked about was commercial applications,
Mhm.
right? And I don't think that people see enough of the non-commercial, like the public sector, right? Like I
Yeah.
think when we were talking earlier, you had said that you personally have used artificial intelligence for nonprofits in India. Tell
Mhm.
me more a little bit about that, about the beneficent side of artificial intelligence.
Yeah. So again, I think AI is sort of making inroads pretty much in every area, right? So as you said, public sector, the social sector. Again, I'm part of a institution called Indian Strategic Development Management Center. So that sort of focuses much more on giving leadership qualities to the not-for-profits, or what they call as social purpose organizations, or SPOs. As part of that, we have created a center for decision sciences for social impact, data science for social impact. And the data science for social impact is, hey, can we take all the things that we are doing in analytics, AI, but make it or target it much more to the common people, to the social sector? I'll give you a couple of examples. So one example is a few people have joined together. They are themselves blind, and they want to target the blind people and provide the education material. Right. So now the education material, we don't realize it as people who can see, right? So there's so many books, so many websites, and all of these things that we can see and digest and so on. But they are only a limited quantity that, again, is in Braille or has been transcribed. So what this group is doing, just literally a few people, is the plan is to take all of the material, right? So various type of benefit material, job prospects, as well as very specific courses, and essentially enable them through voice. Not only enable them through voice, but enable them through multiple languages in India. So that's the other
Yeah.
thing where we're seeing that now it can be translated into any Indian language, and it can be, everyone has a phone there, and it can
Yeah.
be delivered through the phone for the disabled, or rather for the differentially abled, I should say, people. So that's just one example.
Right.
And there's another one where people are looking at migrant workers and looking at how we can facilitate the migrant workers to get jobs and also to essentially learn the right skills. And again, AI is helping them there to try to do the matching between the learners and the earners. And then what should they be learning so that they can get placed? Agriculture, right? So some farms are using piloting certain techniques and natural farming, organic farming techniques, but they do it just within their own little plot. Now, can you take that and then spread it across the country or even across the world, right? So again, various ways in which you can do that with AI, right? So again, part of that is the new large language models, and part of it is not the one, but more traditional technology. So combining all of those things, I think there's an immense potential. And again, AI is being used in the planet, right? So trying to monitor species, biodiversity, right? So if you look at the what are called the SDGs for that the United Nations has, sort of sustainable development goals, and each one of them is AI is being used. It's looking at climate change. It's looking at poaching, for example, everywhere. So images, right? So they're tracking images of poachers and having real-time enforcement officers go in there, and before they actually go and kill these elephants for the tusks and so on, they are able to go and prevent it. So immense use of this kind of technology just permeating everywhere, and largely because it's made it easier to use, much more common people can use. You don't need technical people to do that. So it's a democratization. Of course, the technology and the devices are there. So now with the cell phones, now we are pushing in the intelligence across all of these things. So in that sense, it's really great to see all these things coming together to the upliftment of not just mankind, right? So, but as the planet as a whole, right? So just going beyond the very parochial, hey, it's a human species, we need to, but just even other species and making it a better planet.
So how did those people in India, which I feel like they don't really have a lot of resources, especially if they're in these kind of edge cases, how did they create these apps? Or because for when I look at artificial intelligence, I feel like it's like a really high barrier of entry. I don't know enough about
Yeah.
it to just make it out myself.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the technology is there such that it's user friendly enough that a layperson can make something like that. So like, how did those people that are working for these nonprofits in India, do they partner with like your organization, and then you had like
Yeah,
developers work
that's
with
right.
them?
Yeah. So again, these things are still happening. I don't want to give the view that yeah, it's all there. Yes, you're absolutely right. Right. So the social purpose organization, not for profits, again, as you mentioned, I think earlier, they don't understand data. I mean, leave alone AI, they don't understand data. They are fearful of data, so they just want to go and do their things on their farm or with the community that they are serving, right? So and not really use any gadgets and data driven decision making, all of those buzzwords, right? So it's only for us. So they are just on the ground doing things. Now, at the same time, in a country like India, there is so much of pent up demand and eagerness to help out in some of these organizations, right? So again, India, as we all know, as a huge number of programmers, of course, they are serving whatever Western countries and doing all the coding and business process management and all of that. But they also feel that they need to do something back to the country, right? So there's this demand for, hey, I want to do something. So what we are trying to do, and then of course there are people with funding both here in US and around the globe saying, hey, I want to use my money in something useful, right? So now what we are doing at the center is trying to bring all groups together. Yes, there are people with money, there are people with problems, and there are people who can potentially develop the solution. Can we essentially bring the two together, be a facilitator of all of this, right? So let the funding come from whatever the philanthropic sources, but let's match the problems with the people who can create the solutions and bring them together. So it's essentially some kind of just like you fund a startup, this is like funding a social purpose organization to get started. And once it gets started, there'll be more momentum. And some of them could become commercial. There's nothing to say that it always needs to be social purpose organization. Maybe there are things that other people will fund. So can you provide that initial seed funding and maybe have other organizations jump in as well to make it much more self-sustaining? So we just early days of that sort of journey, we're trying to bring all of those things together and create a platform. Again, there is a notion of, hey, where do I do it? Where do I get the data, right? So data is always an issue for AI. And then I don't have the skills to build all of these models. Can you open source it? Can we have people develop those things in an open manner? Kind of a hugging face for the social purpose organizations, right? So anyone who wants to do that can get share their code, share their data, and over time things will get built up by the community, and then it becomes a community resource. So that's a sort of the vision for it. Just early days, with around 7 organizations have been funded in this way for the first year.
I just wanted to highlight the fact that there's lots of use cases for AI to be of benefit to society, and I think that when people think about AI, they just think about it in the commercial aspect, right? They don't think about it in the pure computational aspect, right?
Yeah.
Like there's not enough people to convert all of the internet into Braille
That's right. Yeah.
It's just too much information.
Yeah.
And so you have to have automated processes that do that for these people, because otherwise you're not going to have the same kind of access that you and I are, right? And so that's a very significant test use case that you brought up that I didn't even think about. And I think that a lot of people don't realize how it can leverage humanity in different ways. They just look at it as like this commercial product similar to having, a Roomba, right? And so I wonder if that would be a good opportunity for people to gain more trust for artificial intelligence, just because I think that that's something that, as we highlighted earlier, that it's just lacking, right? Who do you think is doing it the best, right? Like you have all of these different companies, like Meta just produced Llama. Obviously OpenAI is now part of Microsoft right now. Google has their own engine. I mean, even full self-driving with Tesla and Gronk or whatever. There's all of these different companies that are doing it. Who do you're not in the commercial sector anymore, and so you have, I think, a little bit of more freedom to speak your mind, probably. Like, who do you think is doing it the best?
Yeah, so I don't think there is a one best answer. What I think is encouraging, which again has happened over I think a year and a half. I mean, initially there was a scare that the whole technology might be only 4 companies, right? So more of an oligopoly of maybe a few major players. But with the open source taking a much more prominence, now I think we do see that there is a rich array of different providers all working on it, right? So, and then we are also moving on from just one type of architecture, the transformer architecture, to a couple of other types of architectures as well, right? So, and I think there is more diversity coming. Yes, there are still challenges, and I don't want to sort of brush off the challenges. There is still highly compute intensive for many of the large language models, right? So it's still not under the purview of common person to just pull together something and hey, I can go and get the compute. It is still very expensive at the scale that we are talking about, and still expensive. Now, the expensiveness again means that there's only commercial players who can do. Then the question comes in as to what about the academic institutions and other sectors, sort of not really commercial, right? Like the public sector, like the NSF, the DARPAs, and so on, right? So, and that's where I think more effort is being put in to create these national centers where there's more of that compute capability that can be much more open, not under the typically a shareholder kind of a purview. So in that sense, instead of thinking of who really is the best, I think of it more as, are we creating the right ecosystem for players to actually operate different kinds of things, right? So different kinds of technologies, different types of solutions that can come through. And again, the market will decide what is best. And again, there is no single best. Now, you actually see this happening. Startups to actually start everything from scratch. If you want to be fast, then you're better off actually going with one of the commercial versions, whichever one it is, right? So go with that. Of course, you'll be paying on a per API call, which can turn out to be quite expensive depending on what you do. But then once you have shown the proof of concept, and if it is still a big number, right? So in terms of your compute spend, you go to a open source model, right? So you shift to an open source model later on once you have proven it. And again, venture capitalists are willing to fund that to say, hey, now we can go and make it much more proprietary. So I think people will find the solution. Again, people are looking at the large language models of whatever, 50, 70, 80, 100 billion parameters or even trillion parameters, but bringing that down in size, right? So yes, it's not perfect, but 80%, 90% of the accuracy, but at a much smaller footprint. Can I run it on my cell phone? Yeah, I don't mind the 90%. Again, depends on the task, right? So if it is not something that's critical, I can do. So I think instead of one single best, we have a collection of different, number of different players and a collection of different use cases emerging for which different things are better, which is a much healthier ecosystem, I think.
I totally agree. I think that I really worry when a lot of the technology is concentrated in just a handful of companies. Do you think that the open source environment and these smaller companies are able to compete with companies like Facebook, OpenAI, those kind of types of companies, or are they going to be like the industry standard, the larger companies, and then the other smaller companies might be use cases for smaller projects?
Yeah. So the way I think about it is somewhat like the telco industry, so telecommunications industry, right? So now, of course, we think that these big LLM providers are behemoths, obviously, but they are so great. But I think it'll turn out to be just a utility layer, right? So multimodal models, maybe multimodal models for very specific industry sectors, that will almost become the base, just as we have our pipe. Not that there is no advancement there. As we all know, there was 2G, then 3G, then 4G, now we have 5G, right? So there will be advances there. But if you now look at the overall ecosystem, of course, there are so many manufacturers, there are many apps on top of the various phones. There are so many other devices, right? So it's not just phones, it is sensors, the IoT, the industrial IoT, the whole host of things all rely on the underlying telecommunications infrastructure, right? So of course, there is wireless as well competing with the wireline. And again, the telco operators are the players in all of them. So you'd start thinking that the LLM operators, if you like, right? So that becomes the base level utility on which people are going to build very specific things, right? So for my autonomous vehicle, I need this. For my medical diagnostic, I would need this, but it'll sit on top of an LLM. And there could be multiple LLMs, and as the LLMs change, they would get better, right?
So large language models are being used in industries like full self-driving, or that's a completely okay. I didn't know that. For full self-driving, is it a chat GPT large language model type that is allowing it to sense the environment, or is it a completely different
AI?
AI?
It is more, it's more different technology that is running it. But the reason I'm saying that the large language model could play there is the software engineering world is completely changing, right? So now the programmers are working with these similar to large language or code development modules that are actually writing the code. So even your autonomous vehicle at some point would have code being written by software engineers working with these kinds of code generators.
It's nice to hear that it's not going to be concentrated in just a few big companies. I think that's something that also people fear, is that, this idea of, industry having an outsized role in their daily lives, right?
Yeah.
And it's nice to hear that. So thank you so much for speaking with us. We're coming towards the end of our time. I do want to ask you the same three questions that I ask all of my guests. When I think about the future, I think back to utopian science fiction visions like Isaac Asimov or even Star Trek, that kind of stuff. Where do you gain your inspiration from?
Unfortunately, the same one. Unfortunately, it's the same one.
No,
So
it's not. Unfortunately, it's fortunately. I'm glad we get to talk
no,
about
it's I've always been a big fan of Asimov, and the whole notion around the psychohistory and being able to look at the future of civilizations. I think that's fascinating. My area of interest is actually in simulation modeling, and simulation modeling, what we call as agent-based modeling, and modeling the behaviors of people. And that's even more challenging than just the cognitive thing. How do you manage the behavior? And what's fascinating with respect to the psychohistory comment is we're not projecting the future scenarios, the future civilizations, but there is a taste of some of that happening during the pandemic. So we were doing a lot of the modeling around pandemic. And yes, there was a very difficult situation for the entire world over the whatever the 2 3 years, but it was fascinating to watch the different behaviors and trying to even project some of those behaviors based on individual preferences as well as the government interventions, right? So, and of course, the virus itself mutating, morphing, and all of those combined together, trying to see, hey, where will the outbreak be and how will we handle it depending on our own social behavior, right? It was a fascinating study, and I think we might reach there with the large numbers. I think we potentially might be able to do
Wow.
what Asimov thought of.
Yeah, I mean, I look at, companies like Cambridge Analytica that's looking at human behavior and, all these other companies. And I think that they like if you treat us as just like a huge mass of animals, we have patterns, whether we like to admit it or not. We like to think of ourselves as like individuals, but there is a certain component of humanity that is humanity at large, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I do like uh, a lot of the science fiction that we talked about because I think that if we grow and if we, continue to expand throughout the universe, I think that there has to be a lot more help from AI, a lot more help for artificial intelligence, and to protect us as a species. I think that would be a really good use case for artificial intelligence. Next question. I know that you are very versed in artificial intelligence and all the software capabilities. But outside of your field of interest, what kind of technology really excites you when you're reading about it? Like you're reading through the paper and you see something coming up about genetics or who knows what. What is it something that you can't get enough of as just like a side interest? Like I can tell you for me,
Yeah.
it's artificial intelligence is where robotics are going. Like specifically, I can't wait to have a humanoid robot that's able to do my laundry for me. And every time I see a new robot video on YouTube, I have to click on it. So what about you? What do you like to
Yeah, no,
learn
to
about in your
me,
spare
yeah,
time?
if I were to start school again, I would probably go very much into CRISPR-Cas9, genetic engineering, the whole area around the coming together of the biology, physics, chemistry,
Yeah.
and just looking at molecules, life, right? So again, the distinction of what is a chemical and when does it become really biological, right? So something living, if you like. That's a sort of a fascinating area to me, right? So that also goes into the intelligence, right? So, and I'm also interested very much. Part of the reason of the interest in that, as well as the notion of AI, is the notion of consciousness. Consciousness from a philosophical perspective. The Indian philosophy has a very interesting, unique way of looking at consciousness as pervading everything. And there's just one consciousness from which we all came as consciousness, right? So that's also very enticing kind of a principle of bringing everything together, not just humans, but the planet and the universe all together. The genetic engineering, or even just creating life, right? So
Yeah, I mean,
early parts of
we're
creating
literally
life.
doing that right now. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is like the center of
Yes. Yeah.
biotech. Moderna's headquarters is literally 2 blocks that way.
That's right. Yeah.
Uh, what they're doing is amazing. I mean, we literally cured sickle cell disease, right? A genetic disorder
Yeah.
that plagues so many different people. Those kind of genetic diseases could be a thing of the past, which would be really interesting to see.
Yeah.
So last question, where do you see AI in 10 years? What does the future look like for humanity, for artificial intelligence, let's just say in the home or, at large, even whichever you would prefer in regard to whatever environment, what is artificial intelligence going to look like in 10 years for your environment of choice?
I think I see the current sort of excitement similar to the 98, 2000 excitement around the internet. Hey, we can do things, we can do commerce, we can do all of that. And then obviously we had the boom and the bust. But after that, it still essentially become a mainstay, right? So it didn't really completely displace, as some people were there, right? So I was obviously there at that time. People were saying, no, now the intermediaries will be completely taken off, right? So whether it's insurance or banking, it'll all be, the internet will take over. It didn't happen. Yes, the advisors are still there. We still, as you just said, we still want to talk to people, especially about health and about finance. In both cases, I think we probably want to talk, especially if it's more money, if it's very critical, something about health, we didn't want to talk to people. It's not that we don't have the internet. We still have the internet, right? So still, I can go and do my transactions at midnight, right? So I don't have to call anyone. So in that sense, it's become part of our life. So 10 years from now, what I think AI would be, we wouldn't be talking about AI as such. Maybe we'll be talking about some very specific advances within AI, right? So maybe we may not even be calling it generative AI, we might call it something else, right? So artificial life or intelligence in an artificial environment of some kind. It might be something else, but I think AI will become more and more a part of what we are doing, both in the consumer side as well as in the enterprise side. So people will take it for granted. Yes, yeah, there are some AIs working there. Yeah, just make sure that it's sort of working properly, testing it. I know people get very worried about the hallucination, the wrong information, not giving references. All of those are, yes, challenges. I don't want to deny them, but those all will be fixed, right? So there are various solutions already emerging. So it's just an initial teething problem. So we'll get over some of those things using various mechanisms, not always large language models. You might combine it with old technology, some with new technology, have it human validated. So very quickly we'll move on from there. And that might become, as I said, the utility layer. And we'll probably be focusing on more important things. I don't quite believe, again, you talked about existential threats. I don't believe in this sort of this singularity notion or this AI superintelligence, which is outside of us, outside of our control. I don't believe that kind of a future is what everyone is working towards. We would be assimilating AI, right? So we would be using more and more AI. Yes, would we lose some of the skills for doing math or doing some of that reasoning? Probably, right? So just as we have, maybe some of them have lost the multiplication table, right? So you need to go and refer to it. So yes, we might lose some of those skills, but we'll be internalizing and growing with the AI, as opposed to AI being somewhat separate there and then challenging us. So I don't see that kind of a future scenario.
Yeah, more of a symbiotic relationship.
Symbiotic relationship, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, I hope that we get there. Thank you so much for painting that picture for us, as well as sharing your wisdom and your insight. I really appreciate having you on the show, and I'm sure that all of our listeners do as well. And to those listeners, please like and subscribe, as always. We really appreciate your engagement as well as your downloads. So for those of you guys who listen on a regular basis, we will see you in the future. Have a great one, everybody.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for having me.
We appreciate you taking part in today's episode. Take this chance to reimagine a better future by joining a community of futurists who strive for a remarkable world. Be a part of this growing network and contribute to making the world a more positive place. Visit thefuturistsociety.net and subscribe to the show so you don't miss a drop of hopeful futurism.